How do I get a better view on here? That's better. I'm gonna have to say something. I can't. I don't like silence. So hi everybody. Glad we're all smiling now and laughing. And really
I'm Mark.
So we're recording, but somebody's gonna have to do some clever editing, I think. Start. If we were in a hotel now, all meeting face to face, we'd be talking to each other, wouldn't we? So yeah, that's my opinion anyway. Hi, Brian. Hi, Stephen in North Dakota.
Good morning.
Morning. Oh, it's afternoon for us, but morning for you, obviously. It's not quite bedtime, but it's coming to the end of the working day in another hour and a half or two. And if the silence remains, I'm going to just end up talking about the weather, aren't I? Which is glorious here at the moment, actually.
Talking about the weather, it's cloudy up here though, Mark. We're only what, a couple hundred miles away.
Dear. Oh dear, yeah. Oh, it's nice and warm here. I want to say I haven't even put any socks on today, so that's how warm it is. So
You don't have to put socks on when you're in Zoom meetings.
that's right. That's right. Yes, and we won't go any further than that, will we?
I'd hope you put socks on if we're in a face-to-face meeting.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, you wouldn't know really, would you? I guess. But, noticing it's 3:30. Leslie, did you want to make a start, or
I'm
Taylor?
happy to kick us off here. I guess I should get my proper
Should we give
name.
another minute,
here.
do you think, or?
Yeah, let's give folks just a couple more minutes. And
Yeah.
for those of you who are joining, we've requested that if you're willing, you put in the chat your name and where you're joining from today. So that can be your get us started activity as we give folks just another minute or two to get started.
Hi, Ordineo. I didn't get, I've got a little bit of Spanish and Welsh and English at the start, and I haven't got any Nigerian, unfortunately. So please feel free to say welcome when I get to that part. And also in Morocco, please feel free to say welcome in your language of choice. So where's Big Bend National Park then? Texas, is it? TX? Would that be Texas, would it? It's great to see everybody joining. That's a long title there, Patty. The American Society of Mechanical Engineers from Maryland.
All right, well, it looks like we've got a fair amount of folks joining. We might have a few more trickle in, but let's go ahead and get started. My name is Taylor McKay-Bianchi. I'm the Executive Director of Rural Schools Collaborative, and we are based in West Central Illinois, so that's where we are calling in from today. And I'm excited to see you all for our second event for the Rural Educators Across Borders group. And I wanted to give a quick overview of where we're headed today and then turn it over to Mark for a quick welcome. But we're going to chat with you all today a little bit about our Welsh partners that have their pedagogical approaches in sustainability and the rural impact. We will also hear from a mix of teachers and educators on our Rural Teachers Sustainability panel. We'll have time for breakout sessions and are looking forward to your questions and good discussion. We'll also share out back from those breakout groups, have some time for a group Q&A, and talk a little bit about where we see the Rural Educators Across Borders program going next. So without further ado, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping first before I turn it over to Mark. If you are willing, we'd love for you all to try and keep your videos on if you can. It helps the speakers feel really engaged and your peers feel engaged to see your smiling faces. Try and be present. We understand there's a lot of competing priorities, so we hope that we will do a great job of keeping you engaged in today's presentation. And also be sure to share the air. So, we always want to, especially in those breakout groups, make sure that we're making space for all different voices to be heard. Some folks are more internal processors and need a little bit more time before sharing out. And finally, we hope that you will feel free to use the chat throughout this presentation to ask questions, share ideas or comments or positive feedback. So feel free to stay engaged. This is meant to be a true discussion, not just a presentation. And with that, Mark, I would love to turn it over to you for a welcome and introduction.
Diolch, Taylor. Thanks. And bienvenidos a todos. Croeso pawb. Welcome everybody to our second Rural Educators Across Borders event. And it's really great to be here with you. And obviously, thanks for coming along. I'm not going to say much, which some of you will know that's not like me. But I'm really not going to try and say much today. But it's really great to be here as a result of the collaboration between the Rural Schools Collaborative, the Teton Science Schools, the Princess of Gerona Foundation, and Welsh Government. And from a Welsh perspective, I really see this as a sort of international dimension to the talk pedagogy work that we do in Wales around that community. So it's great to be here as a result of that collaborative work. This work started really when I met Gary Funk. I'm not sure if Gary's here, but he was MD of the Rural Schools Collaborative a number of years ago, and he was over in Wales and we met up. We had a little walk around a place in sort of West Wales then on the coast, a little coastal town called Aberaeron. We visited a few schools and we talked about the concept of what if we started talking about rural schools and what if we did this, what if we did that, and we've continued the conversation. And as a result of it, we've had a couple of events now. We've had a couple of opportunities to bring teachers together and other colleagues together. We've got a series of events planned for the coming year and a half, and we're really hoping to be able to offer an opportunity for a small number of schools to actually engage in collaborative working across the countries represented. So exciting times ahead, I hope. The main focus of that work will be obviously study of place, understanding each other's place, sharing our stories, sharing our experiences, the importance of place-based learning and teaching in place, and also exploring pedagogy and developing the concept of resilience. So I'm not going to talk much more other than to say thank you to everybody who's been involved in the planning, and also thank you to those who are sort of obviously playing a more active role in today, particularly Leslie in terms of Jean-Luc Picard on the main desk there in terms of controlling everybody, and obviously Taylor and her team for all the work that's gone on in the background in terms of the planning. Phil, who from one of the regional consortia in Wales, Gwe is going to be sharing some aspects of how sustainability fits into Curriculum for Wales, and our panelists, obviously, Johan, Lola, Sheila, Jamie, Melissa, Sharon, and Bethan. And apologies if I missed anybody out, but also a great thanks to all those who've come along today. So on that then, I think, Taylor, we'll hand over to Phil, shall we?
I wanted to share just a quick framing before we get to Phil's presentation. So I think it's interesting for us to come together as an international group, especially in small or rural places, to discuss today's theme, which is the local to global context of sustainability in rural schools. And so I thought I'd offer just a few pieces of framing for today's event as we get ready to hear from Phil around the Welsh curriculum that they've been doing, but also to hear from our panelists on what is the role of rural schools or small schools in sustainability. And so for some added global context, the United Nations noted climate change as one of the greatest challenges of our time. And they have prioritized climate action as one of the key international priorities for our global sustainable development. And I think why this is going to be an interesting conversation today is because we all know that rural and small places, or historically underdeveloped places, can often be the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So, for example, some communities might depend on the land for their livelihoods, whether that's farming communities. We also may have places where if there is an increase in natural disasters brought on by climate change, that rural or small communities may not always have the same amount of infrastructure or resources to be able to react to and recover from those types of natural disasters. And, you know, it's not an issue that any one place or any one country can address in a silo. It affects all of us. And so we all need to be engaged in the conversation for how to approach this from the global perspective. I also think it's really interesting to think around schools in this conversation and what is the role of schools. I know in the rural US, and we'll probably hear a little bit more about this, schools are very often the meeting place where folks come together. We actually had some partners in Northern California, and when they had a lot of fires, the town used the school as the meeting place and the safe place to come together as they were actively fighting fires. They brought their livestock to the school to keep them safe from the fires. And so schools really can often serve as the hub of a community. And also, teachers and educators know that our students are our future generation of leaders. And so they will need to be an active part of the conversation in terms of how we're addressing sustainability. And it's all of our shared futures that are sort of at stake in this conversation. So just some food for thought around why today's theme is particularly interesting for both small schools, but also that global perspective. So without further ado, we are excited to talk about what is the role of rural schools in creating sustainable communities. And before we kick it off to the panel, we would love to do a local spotlight on some curriculum development that Wales has done in order to support sustainability conversations in their curriculum and their pedagogy in schools. So Phil, if you're willing to kick us off, I would love for you to give an introduction, and I will be happy to run the slides for you as you're ready.
Thank you very much, Taylor. Yeah, my name's Phil Lord. I work for a regional consortium in North Wales as a school improvement advisor, supporting humanities and developing that within schools. And then we've been working on a national project with Mark, looking at pedagogy, specifically within the humanities, and looking at what that might look like in a range of aspects through diversity, sustainability today, etc. So I'm just going to go through a bit of as it says, a regional spotlight, what Wales has been doing regarding sustainability. Now, we've been on a sort of quite a roller coaster over the last few years on curriculum reform. There is a new curriculum beginning in 2022 in September, later on this year. And we've been really encouraged to think about the why of the curriculum. So rather than jumping straight into the pedagogy and the classroom practice, we've been asked to consider and stop and think about why is it that we cover what we cover. And I think that's a really nice place to think about sustainability. And Taylor's already mentioned that. thinking about our role of schools, where we are placed, why are we teaching what we're teaching. So, I mean, from a fundamental level, there is a curriculum, a top-down sort of, this is why we need to do it, because it's part of our curriculum. That's one thing, but that then includes then the what. What am I teaching? Why am I teaching? It's very important. But then if I'm going to break down why am I teaching it, what is it that I'm trying to get the pupils to understand? What is it I'm trying to get the pupils to do? What is it I'm actually trying to get across? And then the final question is, well, how do I go about doing that? And I suppose that links then directly into classroom practice and the pedagogy. But you can't do that directly. You need to go through the why are we doing this? What is it that we're trying to teach? And then how do we go about doing that? So that's the journey that Wales has been on. So if you can go on to the next slide, if I just pause then in the why. Curriculum for Wales is based around what they've called the 4 purposes. These 4 purposes are our aspirations for all learners within Wales to achieve and to do and to understand and be by the time they've gone through their formal schooling. And they're broken down into these 4 headings: ambitious, capable learners, which wouldn't be surprising; enterprising, creative contributors; ethical, informed citizens, which I'm sure you can see sustainability probably fits within there; and then healthy, confident individuals. So this is a well-rounded curriculum that is being designed that will allow those pupils to meet lifelong learning goals throughout their life. And then within that, we've got this ethical, informed citizens, and they're broken down. There are a number of statements in each of those. And the first one, or one of those, sorry, is to do with a commitment to the sustainability of the planet. So very fundamentally, from the top down, if you like, there is this understanding that sustainability is an important part, an important aspect of our learning and our teaching, and it's something that schools can contribute to really well. But then more subtly behind that are a couple of other aspects. So understand and consider the impact of their actions when making choices and acting. Well, actually, a lot of the sustainability or the problems that we're currently facing is to do with the choices that humans have made. And actually considering our choices, the possible consequences of choices, is an important aspect around sustainability. And then also thinking about respect and the needs and rights of others as a member of a diverse society. It's how do we impact on not just my society, but the societies around the world? How am I contributing to something that's much bigger than me, even though I might live in a rural community in some sort of corner of Wales or wherever. Next slide, please, Taylor. But actually, it's all well and good saying Wales wants us to, or the curriculum or the government suggests it needs to be there. Actually, there's a bigger question, isn't there? And it's our future. It's much bigger than a curriculum issue. It's much bigger. I think Taylor's already referred to. It's the single most sort of problem facing our generation is the future of our planet. And so actually, there is a bigger issue at stake, not just because Welsh Government suggests that we need to teach sustainability, but actually it's sort of morally there as part of our purpose and why we're doing what we're doing. So the next then, moving on to the what. The next slide, please, Taylor. There you go. I've just sort of highlighted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals because they outline sort of the what that can be passed on and the what that can be discussed as part of our curricula within schools. There's some nice headings there. Some of them are directly linked to sustainability and the climate, like climate action, the life below water, the life on land, etc., etc. And then there are other things looking at no poverty and zero hunger, something that we can all contribute to, that we may all be responsible for, I'm not sure, but it's definitely worth a conversation within the classroom. And so there you've got your what, linking to the why, and then the next slide just helps then to provide a bit of a context in how then that might be delivered. So I'm moving now more towards the pedagogy and the pedagogical approaches, but starting with maybe the context in which we live. And this fits that rural aspect and maybe where you are and what you are doing within your locality. This is a map of Mochtra. So the first one is a map of Mochtra, where I live in North Wales, near Colwyn Bay, in Conway, near the sea. Not often sunny, but it is sunny today. This is where I live. And this is how it's changed in, I think, about 120 years, I think. And you can see that the sprawl of Moktra, and I imagine that you can probably all identify with this, but where we are, where I was, there used to be lots of fields, and those fields have been repurposed for sort of industrial units and housing. There's lots of green space and lots of trees around us. But actually, the context in which I live has gone through a huge amount of change in not a long period of time. 100 years is a long time if you're living 70 years, but if you've been around on the planet as long as humans have been, actually it's not that long. And so actually sort of Moktra has probably changed quite a lot in quite a short space of time. So that's the what that I can pass on, but actually that turns now into the how. So if you go on to the next slide, it's exactly the same slide, but I've rephrased it with the how, because this now becomes part of my pedagogy. The pupils know this area relatively well. They probably know the top map, not the bottom map. They hadn't realized how Moktra has changed in such a short period of time, although they might think it's a long period of time. But actually starting within my context, they can start to draw out those aspects that are important from a sustainability point of view. A few of the schools that I work with, they were using this phrase, and I really, really like it. It says, learning locally, developing globally. I'll just pause there for a second for you to listen to. So listen to that again. Learning locally, i.e. what is it that's in my area that's inspiring me, that's drawing me to learn, but actually it's developing me globally, because I know, and through collaboration, we know that children all around the world are probably facing similar issues or similar concerns, or their area have grown in and developed in similar ways. So if we go on to the next slide, then we can have a look again at the how. So Welsh Government have developed these things they've called the 12 Pedagogical Principles, and they are a way of engaging and supporting teachers as they develop their why and their what into the how and into their classroom practice. And I've sort of emboldened a few of those because I think they work really well in a sustainable development context. And the first one is worth mentioning: authentic contexts. And you can probably see that me discussing my area of Moktra in North Wales is my authentic context. It's the bit that I know well. And as I'm developing these issues around sustainability within the context of my own experiences and the experiences of the children, it's creating a bit of if it means a lot to me, how can I then, sort of using empathy, start to sort of understand how that might affect other people from around the world? A blend of approaches. So rather than just teaching children in terms of a didactic, these are the problems, how do we solve them? Actually, it's about pupils engaging with those, learning, researching, coming up with the problem solving. On the bottom left, actually, there's one that hasn't been emboldened, but I meant to. It's the problem solving and critical thinking, or creative and critical thinking. It's the second one down on the left-hand side. These are our problems. They're not teachers' problems, they're the world problems. And actually getting pupils to think through issues and concerns, but how are they going to solve them is a really good pedagogical approach. Thinking about learning locally, what are my problems locally, developing globally, because actually they might solve global problems looking at local issues. Taking on increased responsibility. And this one I like, and I'll finish on this one. And I think this sort of sums up what we're doing today, and that's encouraging collaboration. Collaboration to develop understanding that what I'm going through is what other people are going through around the world, or encouraging collaboration within your locality with the people who can solve the issues within your locality. So there's lots and lots of ways that pupils, teachers, schools can get involved using these to sort of engage their classroom practice, and I'll just finish with this, remembering what is it that we're trying to pass on, and more importantly, why are we doing what we're doing. Thanks, Taylor.
Thank you so much, Phil. It's really exciting to hear how Wales is really being a trailblazer in terms of thinking about pedagogy, place, and curriculum all brought together. So I know that in the United States, obviously, we have a much larger footprint and a lot of diversity in terms of how our schools are run. But I think it's really exciting that piece you mentioned around collaboration. So what can we in the US or we in Spain or we from all over the world learn from, what Wales is doing and vice versa. So that actually brings me to, I'm very excited to introduce our panelists today to talk a little bit more about their experience of the role of schools in sustainability. And so I'm wondering if the panelists would be willing to introduce themselves one by one in this order, perhaps, and tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, and maybe the place from where you're calling in today.
Well, so hello, my name is Joan Martí Casas. I'm from Barcelona, but actually I'm doing now my practices in a little town in Extremadura. It's a autonomous community from Spain also. And I'm willing to say my purpose in this school regarding the sustainable development or sustainability, because I find it really helpful for me that being in a city, you don't suffer so much this global warming or global changes, but being in this town that the main wealth of the families are the field and that they suffer a lot from this lack of rains, and also it has been really helpful for me helping these families and being more aware of what the problems of the future are that actually are problems of the today.
Good afternoon. My name is Ola Rubio Alberca. I am from Murcia in Spain, but I work in Santiago de Ribera right now by the Mediterranean Ocean. I'm an elementary school teacher. I'm currently teaching English as a foreign language and Spanish as a second language. And I was a student teacher in a rural school in Extremadura, where Joan is at the moment, during my spring semester of my senior year, which was last year. And I'm also very excited to share my ideas and what I lived in the rural school regarding sustainability with you all.
Hi, my name is Sheila, and I am a teacher who works in Spanish school abroad, and in which their aim is to promote the Spanish language and culture. Actually, I am in Morocco, and also, as Lola and Joan said, I did my senior year practice in Extremadura in a rural school.
Hello, my name is Jamie Faring. I am coming to you from a very small town, Bedford, Iowa, right in the middle of the heartland. I teach middle school sciences. So I teach earth and space science, life science, and physical science for 6th through 8th graders. And I'm slightly different in the educational field, being that I am new to teaching. This is my 3rd year as an educator. And my background is actually in fisheries biology, is where I got my degrees in fish biology, and then worked 9 years in ag biotech, focusing on sustainability and genetics. And I'm proud to be able to bring my background, my diverse background in agriculture and in ecology, to my school district.
Hi, my name is Melissa Wyman. I'm coming to you from Vermont, which is in the Northeast US. I live in a community that's both rural and not rural at the same time. We have a lot of the same struggles that many small rural communities have, and yet we are kind of surrounded by some more populated areas. I am a high school English teacher. I also oversee curriculum instruction in our building. So I have my feet in both worlds of what I want to do in the classroom and how to support others in implementing it across their classrooms. So I'm super intrigued by what Phil shared, and I'm really excited to learn from the other panelists and share my experience here in Vermont.
Hi, I'm Sharon Davis, head teacher of a very small rural school in a a little place called Manabia in Pembrokeshire, Wales, right by the sea, beautiful part of the world. But however, we have the socioeconomic background of the school is high level of needs, high level of deprivation, real poverty issues. There is industry in the area. However, many of our families are unemployed, and therefore it creates a situation for us where we need to think outside the box and look at giving our children access to more diverse learning, and place-based education is absolutely ideal for that. We're also a philosophy school, and my background is in philosophy, and we celebrate actually being able to offer such a diverse range of things for the children with the staff and all of their abilities. So I'm sure as we go along, we'll explain a bit more about the climate literacy teaching that we've embarked on. But I think one of the things that we're really intrigued by is being involved in this project and listening to what's happening in other places around the world, because it is a very exciting time for my staff to be involved in a new curriculum in Wales. We've been waiting for this for a very, very long time. So yeah, looking forward to seeing what everyone else is doing.
Good afternoon and prynhawn da, and thank you for the invitation. My name is Bethan James. Like Phil, I'm a supporting improvement officer or advisor in North Wales. I live on the west coast in Mid Wales, and I'm currently serving and supporting 2 cluster groups of primary schools, and many of them are very small rural schools. I can think of one which has 22 pupils between 3 and 11 years old. I've got particular interest in the humanities, and certainly education for sustainable development and global citizenship isn't a new thing for Wales despite our new curriculum. We had a document back in 2008 called Education for Sustainable Development, some guidelines and common understanding for schools. And I'm sure that has influenced perhaps my thinking over the past decade or so. So I'm looking forward to hearing about everybody's experiences. Diolch yn fawr, thank you.
Thank you so much to our panelists for joining today. I did want to put a quick note. I'm going to paste a link in the chat. Our partners at the foundation in Spain, the Princess of Girona Foundation, have sponsored a teacher generation program, which our 3 Spain panelists have participated in. And that's a great program that sends folks from more urban areas all around Spain into rural places to do their teaching. So we have similar programs here at Rural Schools Collaborative, but I want to give a special thanks to them for recommending the panelists today, and also encourage you all to check out that great program from our partners. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so we can see each other's faces a little bit better, and we'll move more into some Q&A. So for our panelists, you don't all need to answer every question. You can feel free to hop in when you're feeling particularly inspired. But I'm wondering if you could start by telling us a little bit about what are some of the day-to-day practices you have in your classroom or in your curriculum around sustainability. And whoever would like to start, feel free to jump in.
Hi, can I start? Yeah. Okay, so first, take into account that we are talking about rural school and rural students. In the curriculum, we very defined information about how to work in this situation at this school, and sometimes we find zero information. But it depends on the place where are you located. Sometimes there are some schools that they adapt that curriculum and they try to work sustainability techniques and add new methodology where students try to learn this topic from such a young age. So
I'd like to add, so with me, the main occupation here in Iowa is agriculture. So it's very important that when I am going over a lesson that I am constantly discussing how these things impact them individually and as a whole, and why it's important that we are focusing so much on it, because many of my students are, you know, third, fourth generation type agriculture farming, and that's what they are going to be doing. And it's important that they see that the practices that maybe have been used through their family is not going to be sustainable for their families and on from that, and what they can do to impact and start thinking more in like the bigger picture of what their impact is, as opposed to just their one location.
I'd love to jump in and just second that. So one of the big shifts that I've noticed in Vermont, especially during the pandemic, is that a lot of Vermont is pricing out the people in our state. Most of the people in our state really struggle to make a living here. And so a lot of homes during the pandemic have sold, and their second or third homeowners, which is really having an interesting impact on the community, because you have people that aren't living here that are making decisions and impacting some of that culture. So I think for a daily sustainability check is just kind of honoring some of the work that families are doing, is really challenging kids to find innovative ways to continue doing what they have been doing, pushing for broadband internet access, you know, all of those things to make more remote options feasible, trying to get companies to commit to employment within our state, better labor laws, things like that. And I think that it's going to be interesting in the next 5 years or so to see where this trend goes. I mean, finding housing, there's a housing crisis in our state right now, like many other states, in that there's just nothing available that people can afford for the incomes that our region is able to provide.
In my school, regarding everyday practices, what we do is making kids aware that they have responsibilities, because they have a little piece of land next to their playground where every year they plant different plants, fruits, vegetables, and they know it's their responsibility to take care of it, and they love it. So they have a huge bond with nature, agriculture, farming, since their families also work in that field. So what we try to do in school is enhance that love and passion that they have towards nature, by giving them these little daily tasks. So that's what we do, while also connecting with other schools, using nets of eco schools of the region, and also being part of a net of schools that are by the Tahoe River. So for them, it's like a daily thing they do, just taking care of their surroundings and nature in school.
I think, Taylor, part of it for us has been having to design a new curriculum ourselves, gave us the opportunity to, over a 2-year cycle, use the golden threads, really, of putting in bases, if you like, for us to follow, golden themes. So our themes are Cynefin, belonging, community, diversity, global learning, environment, and sustainability. That's the way we felt that it would ensure that the pupils have access to this on a daily basis through any topic that came up, through any theme that came up for teaching across those 4 broad purposes that they talk about in Wales. It just means that, for instance, they've been doing, they were doing a topic around a local beach, which we were able to go to and see. And then that came back, and actually they'd started to talk about energy and then studied the Industrial Revolution. So what happens is by making those golden themes the basis, we manage to get something in on a daily basis through challenges that they do that involves each of those areas. So yeah, another good reason to be moving to this sort of curriculum.
I think the practices that I'm seeing as I visit my schools in Gwynedd in Northwest Wales replicates lots of what you've already spoken about. We've certainly seen schools making better use of their local area, whether that's the local coastal footpath, whether it's engaging with local businesses. I can think of one of my schools that studied the lobster and looked at the lobster fishing that they had on the Llŷn Peninsula. As a greater involvement with working with external partners, whether that's non-profit social enterprises or working with organisations that encourage sustainable energy sources, wind farms, hydroelectricity, discussing things like capturing tidal power. We're also looking at sustainable communities. To what extent are we making the best use of our land and making use perhaps of local food, not only in our school canteen, but also perhaps in our local communities, as we saw during COVID. I was intrigued to hear about the challenge of rising house prices, and that's something we feel acutely in this area, and I'm sure you feel like that also in Manabia, where there's been a terrific increase in second homes and local people are being priced out of the market. So making your own community sustainable is your contribution perhaps into thinking about a sustainable planet and a sustainable world. And I'm also encouraged by the fact that schools often make links with local community groups. I can think of one project in particular where they've train the children to deal with older people, to engage with them and to have a better understanding of how dementia affects perhaps their local elderly neighbours or relatives. Go on. Pupil voice is quite important in Wales as well. We've had things like school councils and eco committees and Welsh language champions for some time, but I'm sure we're seeing teachers at the moment making greater use of pupils' voice in their planning of schemes of work or the curriculum they're going to offer. And quite often those young people and children respond to things that they've seen on the news, whether it's refugees or tsunami or the fires in California. And teachers are able to respond to the interest shown by the children and young people and plan a series of lessons or a series of challenges or experiences in order to reflect that interest. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you all so much. I am curious, from your perspective, what are some of the barriers that are facing, small town or rural teachers in addressing climate change in the classroom?
From my own perspective, the main barrier that we are facing is the head coaches that are leading these schools, because from the teacher staff there are plenty of ideas of involving families and involving kids and going to the land that is near schools, but if the head of studies doesn't support that, it is really difficult from us as teachers, as innovative teachers, to take these kids out of the class or out of the school building and really see and do more dynamic activities. So as for my experience, this has been the most heavy barrier, and it's a shame.
I know, especially us in the United States, the politics that are coming with all of this has been a challenge, especially in an area that I live in. It tends to be very one-sided sometimes in opinions. And so trying to give perspective over how our impacts and what we are doing just doesn't affect us, that it's affecting the whole. And I try and remind my students, and I'm like, what might be beneficial for you is not beneficial for everybody. And that isn't just here in our classroom, that is everywhere. And you will eventually be the people who are voting for people in politics and government who will be making decisions, and understanding what your impact is and what those choices make. I want you to be educated and knowledgeable when you get to the point where you're making these decisions. And so hearing the other sides of situations, how our impacts are affecting everybody, is really important for me to include in my classroom. And sometimes that means controversial topics that they might not agree with. But I find it very important. My father is a lawyer, and debate and conversation has always been something that has been taught to me, and respecting each other in debate and conversation. And so I really am trying to push that with my classroom, and as we talk about these controversial topics and decisions that we're making.
I'm really agree with Jamie and also Joanne, because first of all, with Joanne, because if the community doesn't support you with this topic, which is basic for us, which is very important, our the children learns from others and from our action. If we say, most of all, the family said to them that climate change is most important, what is that for, why we have to take care of it, our students do what the family or the adults say. So I think that debate that we create at class is very important, because there you can see what type of students you are raising, if they agree with your ideas, if they are trying to learn how to face this climate change, and if they are also involved with that, and they have the idea of that the climate change doesn't affect only us, that affects the world and also the future. So yeah.
I think some of my teachers perhaps would feel perhaps that they're ill-equipped to teach some of the challenges to do with climate change, perhaps global warming, because they feel perhaps that they don't know enough of the science, and they'd like perhaps to access information that's reliable as they teach the different interpretations, different viewpoints perhaps to their pupils. I think I'm seeing more teachers perhaps being involved and using local experts, inviting experts to the classroom, and visiting places where where the children can be involved perhaps with hands-on projects to do with some of the challenges facing humanity at the moment. But there's always that need, isn't it, for greater guidance, for greater access to information that's reliable and sound and accessible.
And I think an added complication, at least for my area, is, I am landlocked. I'm in Iowa. I am in the middle of everything. So it's hard for sometimes my students who, we're a town of 1,300 people. That's it. We are the county seat. We are the largest town in this area. And And my students have not really traveled more than maybe an hour or two away and still in Iowa. And so as I'm trying to describe to them, you know, rising sea levels and what that means, and I'm like, okay, you don't see the rising sea levels. It doesn't impact you because you don't see that. I'm like, but with these rising sea levels, we're going to start losing cities. And where are they going to go? They're going to go to your farm. So now your space that you've had for generations in your family is now no longer going to be yours. It's going to be housing. And you're still going to be needing to grow food to supply, you know, we're at 7.9 billion people. And for them, you know, that is a number that they cannot fathom. And I'm like, so in, you know, by 2030, what we're projected to be 9 billion people. And I'm like, so our footprint is going to reduce. You are going to be growing the same amount of food or more, and you're going to have less land because now we've lost, you know, South Miami, we've lost it. We've lost Long Island. There's Inuit communities that are already had to relocate a number of times because of these rising sea levels. And yes, we don't see it because it doesn't impact us directly. I'm like, but in your lifetime, and I'm like, it will, because you're going to start losing land as people need to relocate. So what can we do so that we don't have that?
As I always say, I think that if you can't see the beauty of life, you have to work on their imagination and start imagining what is going to happen. And actually 50 years ago, if you open the window, there were green mountain, okay, blue sky, even you can see the sea, but now they only see buildings, cars, pollution. So we have to work in the imagination and start imagining how it was and what is the society that we want to see. So
yeah, when it finally became impactful, I feel like for people in where I used to work at, so I used to work for a seed company, when it became impactful to people is when our capital city sued counties in northern Iowa for nitrate levels in the Des Moines River. And they were suing farmers for it. And they're just, I mean, that's when it finally, they were like, oh, so you're saying that we're doing something, you know? And that's when they really started to see, like, when it became now lawsuits associated to increasing nitrate levels in the drinking water, is when they're like, oh, okay. You know, before it was just, that's in the Gulf of Mexico. We have issues down there, but we're not down there. And now they're like, oh, now I'm getting a financial impact with this. What can I do about it?
I can really empathize with what you're saying. I think it's fascinating listening to you and how difficult that must be for you to teach those things. And one of the things that we had to do was exactly the opposite, because we're in a rural seaside village. Yes, we've got that background that I talked about earlier, but its main industry is tourism. So, but again, second homes and all the rest of it. So we've got two very diverse communities there, obviously. And one of the things I wanted to pick up on what Bethan was talking about is what we had to do. When we were looking at the new curriculum, what we had to do, I really had to think about the skills that we had as teachers. And were we able to teach that worldwide information that you're giving us now here? Could I teach that? No, I couldn't. And I had to look at our staff, and what we thought was more getting involved in more of a global project where we use a UN UNITAR courses through a lady called Melanie Harwood to actually train the teachers to become, if you like, go through stages of climate literacy teaching in order to enable them to be able to teach about these things. And we have found it, oh my gosh, it's just been an incredible journey. And and it's still ongoing. We'll be doing it for a very long time. And the courses are really, really good, very intense, but but also it's given us a great depth of knowledge, much more to gain. There always is. But I think for us to be able to impart that to the children and empower them to become more knowledgeable about it, it's certainly helped us understand a lot more about the about worldwide concerns, really, and things that you're going through. So I just wonder, it's wonderful to have this group, isn't it? Because that's how we learn, is from each other. It's so important.
Very much so, because if for me, I'm like trying to describe these things to them, and but have I been in these places? Not necessarily. I'm not as well traveled as I wish I was, and maybe if education paid more, maybe I could do that. But yeah, trying to describe these on secondhand, third-hand accounts and stories and articles and is very hard. But it's until it slaps you in the face that you then understand.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely.
I'm reminded of some training that I did many years ago on philosophy for children for global citizenship. And I think that kind of directed you into your decisions regarding the choice of images you use, the kind of storybooks you use, and the opportunity perhaps to make connections with schools in other areas. Because yes, we have problems with nitrates leaking into our lakes and rivers and eventually our coastlines as well. Even though we're that much closer to the coast, most places within Wales can get to the coast relatively easily. But it's the same challenge we face regarding how we improve the quality of the land and the soil science, isn't it?
One thing I just wanted to add to what Jamie said too, as a barrier that I think is really interesting. I mean, climate change in the US is just so politicized that in a lot of instances, it's almost asking people to vote against their best interest, because we do have these large companies that are huge employers and they do contribute. Like Monsanto is a huge contributor to education funds in the Midwest. And so to ask people to vote, to not just physically vote, but metaphorically question those, I mean, that has a huge impact on some of those funding sources. And I think the other thing is in Vermont, so our maple sugaring industry is a huge industry in Vermont, and it is directly being impacted by climate change because the season is shorter. But technology has increased in the past few years to kind of bridge the gap it's become more efficient. So it's bridged the gap of the decrease in season, but that's not going to last forever. So it's really hard to show students that, yes, you're still making 10,000 gallons of maple syrup, but you're using all of these fossil fuels in order to do that. And what's going to happen when those run out, or we have to, and to kind of get them to project like that is really hard.
And one thing that is a hard concept for them to understand when we're talking about fossil fuel usages and everything. And I'm like, one of the most amazing things that I've ever started doing in the last few months is listening to Star Talk, which is a podcast by Neil deGrasse Tyson, and discussing our inputs of carbons into the atmosphere. And it's like, I was talking to my students just the other day, and I'm like, guys, if we were to completely just stop driving cars and burning coal and doing all these things, and I'm like, our oceans have been overloaded with dissolved carbons, and just like we have to maintain our bodies in homeostasis and sweat when we're too hot or shiver when we're too cold, and like once carbons stop being inputted into the atmosphere, the ocean's wanting to be in equilibrium again, and it's going to start coming out of the ocean. And so what can we do in that aspect? Yes, we've talked about like our elimination of fossil fuels, but now what can we do about dissolved carbons as well? And thinking outside of the box onto that aspect as well.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. It's so interesting. I hesitate to even interrupt because it's so interesting to hear how you all have these different perspectives that come together and kind of feed back into each other. But I'm curious if you folks could talk a little bit. We've had a few folks mention digital tools and how that is maybe changing the environment of the landscape and the curriculum. And so I'm curious, how can we use digital tools to support that local to global exploration and also to help promote these sustainable practices? So what do you see as the role of digital tools in that conversation?
So something that digital tools were something that I used for a project last year in my rural school, because my students didn't see the use of learning English. They didn't find it useful. Here we are. So what I did was establishing connection with a school in the United States, a city school, so they could see the difference between one school and another, one country and another, one a city and a really small village. So I think it would be very useful to establish connection with other schools that have different landscapes or different issues, and what Jamie was referring to, raising sea levels. And once they've established a personal connection, it's easier to start working on other things like nature around them or just the landscape or those issues. So I think it could be very useful. And nowadays we have Zoom, we have Google, like all of the things that they have, YouTube, like it's very easy. It's just harder, I think, to find schools with the same mentality or teachers that are willing to help you introduce these kind of projects. So that would be the barrier that I think it would be harder to address.
So in my class, recently we did a project called What Other Can See, because emotions are the strongest weapon that we have. And it should be a beautiful tool if we combine all photographies and showing the after and the before of that play, convincing our students that there will be no after if we don't change our mind. So we did a project where we collected different photographies of the places that we have here. And we showed that how in 10 years ago, this place was completely different. So, and it was really good and nice for them.
When it comes to technology, I think the best thing that was ever invented is Google Earth. And especially Google Earth Pro. I utilized that in a geology class that I took for my teaching license. And in 2018, a town about 2 hours west of us on the Missouri River was completely devastated, wiped out due to floods. And some students of mine, this is prior to me getting my teaching license, but some students of mine here at the school, they took buses out there to help clean after this dramatic flood. And I utilized that story as tragic as it was for this community to be completely wiped out. I'm like, guys, like, this is where we see, like, you know, climate change and its impacts. Like, we shouldn't have 100-year floods every year. Like, there is no reason that we should have 100-year floods. And this location, it's in the Les Hills, and the Les Hills is an amazing geological feature. It is Les is a wind-blown sediment glacially, and was deposited when we were covered by a glacier about 50,000-60,000 years ago. And it's piled up because it blew down and landed right above the glacier. But as the glacier, you know, disappeared and people migrated west, they found that these low-lying areas were wonderful places to farm. But why do we have these low-lying places right next to a river? Well, that's a floodplain. So it was a beautiful place for us to grow our crops and have your cattle up in the hills. But now that we're getting these 100-year floods constantly, our environment cannot, and what we built it to be at this present time, cannot sustain that. And unfortunately, we are seeing the devastation of these communities being lost. And, you know, here we are 2022, and these areas still have not recovered. These fields have not recovered, communities haven't recovered. And so being able to show on Google Earth, like basically the changes over the course of the history in this area has been amazing.
I think sharing data would be a really effective way to use digital tools to better understand the impact of certain climate issues in different regions. And I know that's a lot easier said than done, because it would take a lot of intentionality and coordination, especially on an international level. But there's data that's available, and it's hard, sometimes it's just hard to find, sometimes it's hard to translate. But it just, you know, if there was a way to share data more universally, I think that really could have an impact on how people understand the impact of climate change on a global scale.
Yeah, I do agree a lot with you, Melissa. Actually, in my school, they are doing a project that is recording videos on how they are taking care of the orchard of the school. So they are posting weekly some videos explaining what they are doing, why they are doing it, and from 1 week ago, there were some of the grandparents of the school that came to the school also to teach how they used to do it back in their times, and what are the innovative proposals that my students are raising in order to make it more sustainable. So these are some videos that they are posting to YouTube, and it's really interesting how other schools that even don't have a network with us are commenting on and that are great ideas and etc. So we are starting to creating bondings, and I think that it's really, really helpful.
I think that's a great point. And I'm wondering, I know we have just a few minutes left for this panel before we go out into breakout sessions, but I've heard a lot around sort of the students' role and the local community and the students on that local to global connection. So I'm curious if you all could talk a little bit about how can our students engage in sort of place-based action to foster sustainability, and what is the role of curriculum or pedagogy in getting the students engaged?
You might be interested in one aspect in particular of the new curriculum in Wales. Phil mentioned it briefly in his presentation. The humanities now are referred to as an area of learning and experiences. So there's an urgency there for us to take children to places so that they can meet people and do things. And the curriculum is structured, the humanities curriculum then is structured around 5 key statements of what's important, what matters in the humanities. And when I heard of Jamie's students taking buses and vans to go and help another community, it reminded me of one of those statements of what matters in the humanities. And I'll read it out to you if I may. It mentions that informed, self-aware citizens engage with the challenges and opportunities that face humanity and are able to take considered and ethical action. And I think then you can see that connection between those 4 purposes that are defined by the new curriculum. So it's not just a matter of giving them the information or giving them tasks to do, it's that encouraging them also to take that considered and ethical action.
Absolutely. You know, we talk about 21st century skills and project-based learning, and some students of mine, and this was the year before I started at another school district, but they went and presented to the Governor's Council about an hydroponics project that they had worked on with their middle school teacher, and that we then continued on when they came to high school with me. And their concept was, you know, can we pull water directly from the source and utilize it for hydroponics? And they found, yeah, you can. And so here we are talking about counties being sued for high nitrate levels and our impact in the Gulf of Mexico and the dead zone and whatnot. And so I've hypothesized, and this is a project that we've discussed about, is like, okay, well, we are losing land due to housing and growing population. Would it be possible for us to, instead of using basic agriculture, could we utilize like chicken houses, chicken farms, like these large, gigantic buildings, and placing them along these impaired water systems that we have all over the place, and running the water directly into that, utilizing it for hydroponics, growing our foods, and then on the back end, it being cleaner water. And so not only would we be reducing our farming footprint, but we would be helping to reduce our impaired waters. And could we do this like on a global scale, vertical farming off of impaired water systems?
I 100% agree with both of what Tim and Jamie just said. I think we toss around the term authentic assessment all the time, but I think when we do our students a disservice when we don't give them real world problems to try to work to solve and expect them to be the solution in the future. And so I really feel strongly that the more I work in place-based ed and project-based ed, the more authentic what we're asking kids to do, the more they're going to start to see how the pieces come together. The maple sugaring unit that I did in my school that I briefly mentioned, we ended up with a culminating project where we had students take the content they learned from sugaring and learn about how climate change was impacting the industry. And then they had to come up with an elevator pitch that they prepared and shared with peers about how the industry could start to adapt now in order to mitigate some of the impacts of climate change on the industry. And one of the students actually took that and found himself in a situation where our superintendent was checking out at his register at a local store, and he said, aha, I've got you here for 2 minutes, and I'm going to give you my speech about why I think this is important and what our district can do. And I think the more that's where the empowerment comes from the kids, is give them skills they're going to use, that they're going to transfer, that they're going to carry. It's not just a percentage of content they learned, it's how do you apply the content to where it matters. And I think that authentic assessment is just so important in really helping these puzzle pieces start to come together.
Thank you all. I'd love to keep the conversation going, but I do want to make sure we have time for breakout sessions. So we're going to do about 10 minutes so that you all can talk in smaller groups and maybe get a little bit more of that teacher to teacher collaboration or international perspective. So we have a few suggested questions for you all, which might be what surprised you from the panel? What is your takeaway from this conversation, or what might you implement in your own classroom? So we'd encourage you to meet in smaller groups. We'll come back together, and if someone from your group would like to share a reflection or a question back as a whole group, that would be great. So we will come back together in about 10 minutes, and I will have Leslie send us to our breakout groups. Thank you again to our panelists, and we'll talk soon.
Could you add me to the breakout room, please?
Hi, everyone. Welcome back from your breakout rooms. I know our group had some really interesting discussions. We're running a little bit short on time, but I would love to give folks maybe 5 minutes just to share out what your takeaways were in your breakout rooms, or any final thoughts for the full group while we're all together. Is anyone willing to start?
I'm happy to kick us off. So we were breakout room 3, and we had Andy, Sharon, and Heather. And what really struck me was that in all 3 of their cases, their particular rural area heavily relied on fossil fuel industry, be it 2 coal-powered power plants or the oil industry. And so it just brought to mind, the interesting paradox that, we rely on these industries globally, for transportation and whatnot, and locally for jobs and economic security and stability. But at the same time, they're very extractive of not just the community, but the globe as well, and its impact on sustainability. So it just really brought to the forefront that hard, how do you talk about these issues while knowing that like you rely on them at the same time?
That's really interesting. And I'm wondering if Frederick from our group would be willing to share a little bit about the classroom to the take-home model that they have in Uganda.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I thank you for this time. Basically, here in Uganda, southern parts, that's Raka district, what we basically do is that what we really do teach children in the classrooms, we have some demonstration parts at school, like we do some piggery, we do poultry keeping. So we are facing a problem of malnutrition among some children. So we do bring some parents, we get some days, we come up with the parents, we teach them how to do this farming so that it can be taken home and the children can be also learn from school and go back and also teach the parents at the same time. We're using the knowledge acquired from schools so that their way of life can be improved and can sustain the community, and at the same time, the parents at home, it can enable them to earn a living because most of the parents in these villages are poor. So the parents can do selling of these birds, animals, so that they can get some money to buy books, shoes when they go back to school. So thank you so much, Taya. That's what I can share with the group here. Yeah.
Thank you, Frederick. Any other folks that would like to share with the full group?
Yes, if you don't mind, I'm going to share what we have shared with Mark, Terry, and I think that there was one other person, I don't remember now, but I feel related with what Frederick was saying, because we have talked a lot on how to create those bondings between the school and the families in order to reach more what we want them to learn. We have shared some different perspectives on how in my school we create those bondings, but also on how Mark and Terry engage those families to schools, and it has been really, really great. Basically, the conclusion that I get is that it's really important to give them voice, as we are doing now in this session, that we are sharing our perspectives and sharing our ideas. It's really important to the families to give them the opportunity to share and express their own ideas so they can feel more related and more involved in the educational community. Also, we have shared that in the rural schools, there is a more sense of family, of community, rather than in cities that people go more on their own, or at least in Barcelona. Mark has shared that in Cardiff there is more sense of community, but it's really great, and I think that we have to really empower those rural schools, because they are the essence of what we are willing to reach of this 2022 education.
This is so great, and I want to encourage everyone to continue to utilize the chat in our last few minutes together. I'd love to hear from you all in the chat, maybe what keeps you inspired. You know, this can be a really heavy topic, but what keeps you inspired? And so while you're thinking about that, I like to share just a few more ways that you all can get involved with the Rural Educators Across Borders program as we're coming to a close. So we would love to invite you folks to sort of opt in to a homework assignment. We think it would be really exciting to keep these conversations going and to also learn more together around what is it like in your place? What is it like in your place? And so an easy way to do this is we'd love to invite you to participate in a what's outside my window. So taking a photo of your place, whether it's your community, whether it's your school or a landmark, and sharing a few sentences with us about where you are. And the Rural Educators Across Borders team are going to pull these together on our website and start an international photo gallery. So this will be really exciting. You can get your students involved if you'd like, but I think it will just be really interesting for us to start to build up a photo gallery of your place, and for us to continue the conversation about what is the same, what is different, how can we collaborate, and how can we learn from each other. So we'll hope to continue to do activities like these as part of our panels so that we can still feel engaged in between times where we see each other. And we'll be sure to send out instructions afterwards to you all so that you have this information about how to submit your photos. Lastly, we at the Rural Educators Across Borders planning team are really excited to continue these conversations. We are also hoping to give more thought around how can we do teacher-to-teacher exchanges, which is something that I heard in my breakout group, that folks are really excited to continue these conversations one-on-one and to have classrooms and classrooms working together. But in the meantime, there are lots of ways that you can stay involved with us. You can share your story with us. We do a lot of storytelling and we'd love to hear your experiences in your classrooms. You can follow our newsletter to get more information about events like this or other work that we do. And you can also share a resource. So we have a new part of our website that is resources, and we'll be sure to add the recording from today to our resources page. But we'd also like to spotlight the Welsh curriculum redesign that they're doing. So if you have other place-based resources or ideas that you'd like to share with this international community of educators, please feel free to do that. We'd also love to hear any feedback you have from today's event. If there's something you'd like to see more of or less of, this is a brand new program, so we'd love your input on how we can continue to make it engaging for you all. Mark, would you like to share any last thoughts? Did I miss anything?
No, I think you captured it all there, Taylor. It's just been great listening to everybody and listening to the conversation as has been shown in the chat. So I don't think I really need to say anything else other than thank you, everybody. It's been a great experience, and I'm sure Taylor backed that up as well now.
Well, thank you so much. This was the best part of my week by far. So we appreciate you all spending your time with us, and we're looking forward to staying connected with you in the future. Thank you again. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks a lot.